costume because, well, you remember when the Barbie movie came out and everyone dressed up like Barbie and went to the movies? This is my Barbie. Geralt of Rivia, my precious Barbie. This book shouldn't exist. The new Witcher book, Rozdrože Krukov, or Crossroads of Ravens in English, is a prequel about the young years of Geralt, and for that reason, its very existence is a broken promise by its author. Andrzej Sapkowski swore to never write a Witcher prequel. In 2003, after he had finished writing the Witcher saga and had begun work on the Hussite trilogy, he said, "The story about Geralt of Rivia is finished with the 7th volume. There will be no sequels or prequels." 10 years later, when Season of Storms came out, he explained, "This story is completed, there is nothing to add to it. I can always go back to the Witcher theme, but this will not be the 6th volume of the saga, or the young years of Geralt, or something like that. Never." So, everything pointed to Crossroads of Ravens being nothing more than a simple cash grab, written not for art, but purely for money. So, why is it so good? Now, nothing is preventing a prequel or the like from being good. There are certainly a lot of media spin-offs that are good, and even some that I liked more than the original ones. But prequels are generally not that great. So why does Crossroads of Ravens work for me? I know I could just say, I liked it and that's that, but I want to go deeper for a couple of reasons. Of course, everyone's allowed to like what they do and dislike what they don't, but what I find is that when people don't ask questions about why a media works for them, there's a lost opportunity to learn anything from that media, which can then be applied to new medias in the future. Pop culture has a lot of titles and franchises, and things get remade and added onto all the time. We're not going to be able to stop the floods of prequels and sequels, but what we can do is look at when these media spin-offs actually work well and mesh with their original series instead of working against them. So we're going to analyze this Witcher prequel from top to bottom to figure out why it works. Why is Crossroads of Ravens so successful as a prequel? How does it engage the original saga while retaining its own identity? And how can we apply this to The Witcher specifically as new titles continue to emerge from the IP? My name is Nimue, or Geralt in this case, and you're watching Ani Vitre.
This video essay contains spoilers for Tower of the Swallow, Lady of the Lake, Season of Storms, and Crossroads of Ravens.
Hi there! Before we start the video, I have a couple of disclaimers regarding translation that I want to share with you. Because Rozdrože Krukov is not out in English yet, and I don't know Polish, except for a couple of random words and phrases that I've picked up. Do I actually have anything that I could say right now? Bez krwi nie ma żak zabawy. Thank you, Adam Bauman, for that. But anyways, the point is that I can't read. Nova Barencourt. Okay, I'm getting distracted. The point is to beg the question, how did I read Crossroads of Ravens if I can't read Polish? Well, I bought it off of Gimi and crammed the whole thing through Auto-Translate. Yep, I read this book by copying and pasting it page by page into Google Translate. Yeah, okay, I know. So here's the thing. Actually, a couple of things. The first is that I think that Google Translate has come a long way since like 5 years ago, because I used to do this also with Tower of the Swallow back in like 2018, and it was not great then, but it was a fine experience now, so it wasn't too clunky or anything. The second is that doing this actually helps sometimes because you get to see things that don't translate because the translator gets caught up on things. The official translations of The Witcher are created for ease of reading and are not necessarily there to give you all of the cultural context. So by doing it this way, I actually got to see some of the untranslatable parts, which we'll talk about later in this video. And thirdly, the biggest thing that I want to disclaim here is that my read of Crossroads is obviously going to be very different than someone who read it in Polish, or for that matter, an English reader in the future who has access to the official translation when it comes out. I also wanted to say that I do feel bad for constantly shoving the beautiful Polish language into the meat grinder that is Google Translate, and the better way to do this would to obviously just be learn Polish. But, you know, the book was coming out in like a month, and that wasn't really an option for me in the short term. However, short-term solutions do not necessarily negate long-term goals. And I'm not trying to endorse that people use auto-translation instead of learning a language. It all just depends on your goals and your time frame, and you can do both. Also, I am planning to buy the official English translation when it comes out. And I'm not trying to steal David French's job. I think that anyone who does this sort of thing will immediately understand why human translators aren't very much needed. Plus, I'm actually really curious about how he's going to decide to translate some of these things, because it being Sapkowski, he is notoriously difficult to translate into English, as we'll soon see in this video. That being said, we really shouldn't waste any more time. Let's get right into analyzing this novel. To first analyze this book, we must first analyze its hero. Geralt of Rivia in the original Witcher series is a Type B kind of hero. Now, what does that mean? This is a classification which Sapkowski wrote about in his 2001 book, Manuscript Discovered in a Dragon's Cave. It's a non-fiction guide to the fantasy genre, which goes over a lot of the common tropes and cliches one might encounter. In his section on heroes, he neatly divides all fantasy heroes as belonging to one of 3 separate models. Although we will shortly come back to discussing the first and third models in the soon upcoming videos that I'm also working on, the second model is what we are to focus on today. The European model, that is, the Legend of King Arthur. The Type B hero in this model is the King Arthur type, the king in trouble, a hero who had power but has since lost it and is seeking to regain it. This fits the Geralt which we know from the saga quite well, the power he lost and seeks to regain being his daughter, Ciri. The Type A hero of this model is the Percival type, the simpleton, a hero who does not yet have power and goes to seek it out. Geralt, as we know him from the saga, cannot be this type, for he is already Type B. However, this Type A fits our young Geralt, who we meet in Crossroads of Ravens, perfectly. In other words, the Geralt we meet in this prequel is not the Geralt whom we already know from the saga. Although they are undoubtedly the same person, they are not the same character, and this works to the great advantage of the novel, because Sapkowski knows how to write a great Type A hero. Maybe the names Ciri or Rainovan ring a bell. Sapkowski is no beginner to writing satisfying coming-of-age stories, and Geralt, as he appears in Crossroads of Ravens, is a continuation of this successful setup. For once, he is not a King Arthur. For the time being, he's a Percival. And a Percival he is. Now, we should ask, who is Percival? Not that one. Not that one either. Although, I love them both. There are multiple legendary accounts of the knight Percival, but for today, we're just going to focus on 2 of them. The first is the Welsh romance Peredur, son of Efraug, the writing of which is anonymous and comes from the collection of the earliest Welsh stories, the Mabinogion. The second is the French romance Percival, the Story of the Grail, by Chrétien de Troyes. These stories overlap, telling similar accounts of some events, while very different in others. As you can see, he already has different names depending on the source, and scholars have debated on whether this is the same character at all. But let's not get too much into the weeds here, and turn our attention to the young knight Percival. In both accounts, Percival is a boy that was raised in the woods by his mother, isolated away from society, until one day when he sees some knights in the forest and becomes determined to be like them. He rides to King Arthur's court, is ridiculed and taunted by Sir Kay, but then proves his ability by killing some rival knights of the court, for which he is granted sword and horse. And Geralt in Crossroads of Ravens starts out similarly. Geralt, like Percival, was raised in isolation, in the Witcher's Keep Kaer Morhen, hidden in the mountain passes. And Geralt, like Percival figuratively, also wanted to become a knight in shining armor, because as he embarks on his path, already with sword and horse, he, like Percival, in an episode first mentioned in Voice of Reason all those years ago, up and kills some evil men, soldiers who attacked a defenseless peasant and his daughter. But sadly for Geralt, this is no chivalric romance. Geralt gets in big trouble for this, as we open on this 18-year-old Witcher getting a stern talking to in the the mayor's office. Because you can't just go around killing soldiers, Geralt. That's illegal. But Geralt doesn't care about what's legal and illegal. He cares about what's right and wrong. Because, at heart, Geralt is a hero. Despite being an inexperienced little Witcher, a far cry from becoming the man we know and love in the saga, Geralt's core person remains the same in this prequel. Sapkowski did not forget who his protagonist is. Geralt has, let's put it in a word, humanity. He saves the defenseless, he sticks his neck out for others, he has scruples. Sorry, just remembering what Milva thought scruples were. And in fact, this is an even rawer, more open-hearted, unshielded incarnation of Geralt. Because he is a hero, but he does not live in a heroic world that will reward him for being as such. It won't give him a horse and arms for killing some problematic knights or soldiers. His world, sadly, is on the side of the soldiers. Geralt's intervention in the situation to save some complete strangers is unimaginable for the mayor of Newhold.
I'll repeat my question. What was this really about? What did you have against that deserter that you hacked him up so awfully? Some old grudge? Because I cannot, you see, believe that it was about that farmer and the lady's honor of his daughter, that you came rushing to the rescue like some shitty gallant knight-errant.
In his response, Geralt, stubborn as ever, can only repeat the truth and cite an outdated law from half a century ago. Our naive, anachronistic Witcher. He's always been anachronistic, even at 18 years old. Geralt, as always in this series, gets punished for his good deeds, but at this point he lacks awareness of the degree of this reality. And there are two sides to this equation. In the original series, we see a mature and jaded Geralt who is knowledgeable about the state of the world. He's aware of its miserable state, and for that reason he guards himself. He tries to remain neutral, he tries not to get himself involved in things, although he usually fails at that pretty miserably, but he's had lessons which have taught him to act that way. And here, he's not had those lessons yet. The second half of the problem, which our young Geralt is also dangerously unaware of, is himself and his own weaknesses. This is where we get the false belief of the novel first stated.
You, Bulava finally said, are not a Witcher. You are a defect. You need fixing.
Ouch. Harsh. In novel writing, the false belief of a character is just what mistakenly guides them in the beginning of their development, and for that reason creates tension throughout the story. This false belief being stated ignites the beginning of the main internal conflict, that Geralt should either get involved and do what's right, what a hero, a knight, a Percival would do, or ignore the injustice, go about his way, and work only for money, i.e. what a Witcher should do. And throughout the story, we see this conflict repeated again and again. Indeed, Geralt's naivete and foolishness make him stand out, and make him a target. He's even about to be executed for his killing. But at the last moment, he's saved by a mysterious figure, another white-haired Witcher, older and experienced, by the name of Preston Holt. One might raise their eyebrows at introducing another Witcher like this, seemingly another Geralt to our Geralt.
White-haired, clad in a black leather coat, studded on the shoulders with silver rivets. Over his right shoulder jutted the hilts of 2 swords.
I mean, white hair, leather jacket, it's practically the same guy. I was initially skeptical too, but Holt and Geralt, in fact, embody a favored motif of Sapkowski's, The Old Witch and the Young Witch, or here, The Old Witcher and the Young Witcher. We see this in the short story, Edge of the World, we see it in Narrenturm, the first book of the Hussite trilogy, and we also see it in the short stories Tendarradai and Happenings at Mischief Creek. We see it in the Witcher saga with Ciri and Geralt and Ciri and Yennefer, and now we see it with Geralt and Holt, who even ride in the same fashion. What's more is that they also begin to embody a pair of characters within our Arthurian framework. As established, Geralt, to Holt, is absolutely a Percival. Moreover, because Percival, well, especially in the beginning of Chrétien de Troyes' version, is a naive, inexperienced, and somewhat annoying boy. When he first meets the knights in the forest, he goes about asking them what all their knightly gear is. He's all like, "What's that, a spear? And what are you wearing, chainmail? Oh boy." And the knights are just like, "Kid, leave me alone, answer the damn question already." Geralt, in Crossroads of Ravens, is equally endearing. Although he already knows what weapons and armor are, the flavor of his youthfulness does not escape the reader, nor does it Preston Holt. Unlike our Geralt from the saga, who's keen with his words and prone to monologues, this Geralt is not. He isn't so educated or well-spoken yet, and as such, uses casual, unrefined phrases.
Like obchaj, to check out. Maybe we should first, Geralt hazarded. Check it out. Do what? Ah, I see. But there is nothing to check out. Drink the elixir, grab the medallion, and go down the shaft. Or, non vesh. Come on. Come on, Geralt groaned, still lying down. Come on. You are supposed to be in the tunnel, making noise, to distract. Really? Holt threw away the bone. Oh, yes. Sorry, I completely forgot.
Geralt's use of these phrases annoys Holt, who soon asks him on the condition of his mentorship.
Don't take offense. Holt turned in the saddle. But I insist that you speak more or less correctly around me. In particular, don't say, check it out, or come on.
Geralt also becomes painfully aware of his own words, and frustrated by the underdevelopment of his tongue, since a lot of vocabulary that people are using around him goes over his head. An example of this is when he starts to work on Preston Holt's behalf, he works for him per procura, meaning by proxy or on the behalf of. Sapkowski loves his Latin phrases, and this book is no exception. But Geralt isn't so familiar with this phrase, even when he tries to use it himself. And amusingly, it turns out in Chapter 8 that he's been mishearing it all this time. When he complains to the priestess Nenica, yay, Nenica's in this book. Yeah. Sorry, I was just very happy to see her. When he complains to Nenica that he's frustrated because he doesn't know all the things that people are saying around him, he begins to bemoan to her that they didn't teach him everything in the temple school, saying that, okay, this one doesn't really make sense in English because it relies on mishearing a Polish word, so you're just gonna have to deal with me trying to say it in Polish.
Nie wiem, co to orbita, ani serograf. Nie wiem, co to znaczy sustentować się, albo co to jest per progura.
Per procura. Cura. Not gura. You want me to work for you per pro mountain? The hell does that mean? Sapkowski did not call the Type A hero the simpleton for nothing. As we continue to speak of the Knight Percival, let's check out how his story unfolds. For this will lead us to understanding who Preston Holt is in this literary metaphor. Striking out on adventure, Percival trains under an experienced knight, and then, by another nobleman, is invited to stay in a castle. The Welsh and French accounts contradict here on the exact identities of these two men. In the Welsh account, the two men Percival meets while traveling are two of his uncles, his mother's brothers. They are unnamed, but play similar roles as in the French. By Chrétien de Troyes' account, Percival trains with the knight Gornema, another knight of the Round Table. And then he meets the Fisher King. The Fisher King is one of Sapkowski's favorite motifs, because it's connected to perhaps his favorite one, the Grail, as we'll soon see. But first, the Fisher King is a curious name, You might be wondering why he's called that. Well,
he was wounded in battle, and so badly hurt, so maimed, that without help he can't even walk. A spear struck him right between the legs, and the pain is still so great that riding a horse is impossible. And when he needs to amuse himself a bit, to rest and relax, he has himself put in a boat and sits in the bow, fishing, and that's why he's called the Fisher King. Fishing is his only distraction. Every other sport or amusement is too painful, which is why he enjoys living so close to this very spot. He's built a house worthy of a rich king.
We might also call him the Wounded King, for what defines him is his thigh wound. There are different variations of the nature of the wound, but a wound in the thigh is kind of a euphemism for a little above that. As Chrétien de Troyes puts it, between the legs. Now, something you have to understand about these stories, and all literature, too, that would be great, is that a lot of the content is symbolic. The Fisher King, by his injury, is unable to have children. He's unable to progenate. And in the medieval context, that means that he's unable to continue his lineage. What he has and who he is will slowly die out. This dying out seems to be one of Sapkowski's favorite ideas from the legend, which he took to exploring in the original Witcher stories and saga through the relationship of the infertile Witcher Geralt and sorceress Yennefer. And we'll also be talking about them on the channel soon. But for now, let's return to our two Witchers. Because Preston Holt offers to mentor Geralt, he can be understood first as a Gornemont-type character. They ride to Holt's estate, Rod Zamora, where he trains Geralt in sparring and fencing. But more importantly than that, Holt is the Fisher King, because he makes an offer to Geralt at the eponymous Crossroads of Ravens, which is as follows.
3 of the paths, including ours, are your paths as the Lonely Witcher, the fate you chose when you set out on the path from Kaer Morhen. If you take any of these 3 paths, if you make such a decision, we will part ways. However, if you choose the 4th path, you will listen to my proposition. I am getting on in years. You would be surprised how much. I am also, and it is visible and impossible to hide, crippled. My days of Witcher glory are already a thing of the past. I will no longer sit out on the trail with swords. The light of my blades, so to speak, will no longer dispel the darkness. But darkness exists. The monsters still roar at night. You can face them and defeat them. People threatened by monsters look to you for help. All right, I'm writing poetry here, and you're waiting for an offer. Here it is. I'm proposing cooperation. I was known here in Caedvin, and I still am. I've never complained about a lack of clients, and even now people ask me for help, which I can no longer give them. But you can. I've taken a closer look at you, and I say, be my successor, Geralt. Instead of wandering hungry along the roads, come live with me. Take advantage of my reputation, and you'll have plenty of work. And after work, you'll have a place to come back to, and a place to spend the winter. And it makes me happy that someone is continuing my work, and that someone would help support me in my old age.
Like the Fisher King, Preston Holt has not only been physically, but symbolically disabled by his thigh wound. This wound, which causes him chronic pain, has pretty much ended his career as a Witcher.
Preston Holt dismounted his horse. Geralt couldn't help but notice that dismounting wasn't easy for him. and that he was limping badly on his left leg. 4 years ago, before road construction had even reached the borders of the Upper March, an accident occurred. In a fight with Meganura, which, by the way, he defeated and killed, Holt was seriously injured and suffered a complicated leg fracture. The accident severely damaged Holt's witchering career. At that time, he bought the former Rotzamora Manor and retired. Holt's body, when undressed in the bathhouse, turned out to be a map of injuries and a chronicle of accidents. The nastiest mark was left by the clash with the Meganura. The left thigh of the old witcher was deformed. In addition to the jaw marks, it bore the marks of surgical cuts and stitches, from the hip almost to the knee.
And it also means that he's unable to continue his name and everything he's built for himself. This is why he initially seeks Geralt to inherit what he had created, although that does not come to pass, for reasons we'll find out. For now, the Fisher King sits, pained, with Percival invited to his castle. Our Percival, Geralt, has a short intermedium where he sets off from Rotzamora to make his own name. As we reach this point in the novel, for a moment, I just want to also mention some other things that distinguishes Crossroads of Ravens from other attempts at stories about a young Geralt. Because, since it's been a couple of decades since the original series ended, there's been a long time for fanfiction tellings of such a story to populate the internet. This is part of why I was concerned when I initially learned that Crossroads of Ravens was to be a prequel, because I felt like I've seen this story 100 times before already. Many others have already taken a stab at writing the young Geralt adventures, and I found them to all be kind of the same. But Sapkowski put his own original spin on this concept, writing it in a way that I think only he could. For many fan writers, it was a very clear path set out for the young Geralt. Leave Kaer Morhen, fight a monster, get paid, rinse and repeat 100 times. Now, Sapkowski also does this idea here in this section, but he complicates it, showing here not only his status as a professional writer, but his experience in the industry and his background in trade. Because our young and inexperienced Geralt does not just go on his way fighting monsters right away. He runs into a mentor who begets him an agent who advises him on where to go and what to do, as well as taking a cut of his profits. I've read many fan accounts of the young Witcher Geralt, but in none of them did I ever read about economies, markets, taxes, agents, or working per procura, or per procura. Another classic Sapkowskiism which I noticed in this book was at the Temple of Melitele, where Geralt visits the priestesses. Here, Sapkowski introduces a subplot which will later be tied into the main one. The priestesses here become the targets of hate, as the medical care they provide women includes abortive services. And it's the way that this subject is framed. Later on, it's revealed that this is only being used as a scapegoat for much larger bigotry. And this is very much what makes this novel identifiably Sapkowski's. For the subject of abortion and Sapkowski's staunch pro-choice views made themselves not only known, but crystal clear in the short stories, Saga, and even in the midquel Season of Storms. Commenting on Polish politics and advocating for women's rights both then and now. Geralt continues to follow the hero's journey, a widely used template in mythology and modern writing alike. So far, we already went through the first 3 steps. The call to adventure, the refusal of the call, and supernatural aid. Geralt left Kaer Morhen, doesn't kill monsters but kills some of the human type instead, and then is rescued from this situation by Preston Holt. Now, we transition from the first act to the second. As Geralt takes on his first solo Witcher contract, he crosses the first threshold and surpasses the belly of the whale. At this threshold, there is indeed a threshold guardian. Here, Geralt meets the halfling, Augustus Hornpepper. Sapkowski's halflings always have the cutest names. And he has halflings because he can't legally have hobbits in English. Augustus Hornpepper is a blacksmith who holds the information about the contract to give to Geralt. But Mr. Hornpepper doesn't just give Geralt the details. He also gives Geralt a bit of wisdom which will stick with him and be repeated later.
Well, let each mind his own. My business, the anvil and the hammer. An innocent woman murdered is the business of the mayor and the courts. It's yours, the Witcher's business, to deal with what's killing people in the forest.
After this contract comes a road of trials, many more contracts, in which Geralt gets his first taste of the profession. It's simply a series of adventures that serve to develop. And Geralt's setting out on the path is when our conflict from earlier, the "you are not a witcher, you are a defect," comes back in full force. Here, Sapkowski resurrects a familiar and exceptionally nostalgic motif from the original Witcher short story, in which Geralt is hired to disenchant a cursed princess, a Striga, or anglicized Striga. But Geralt here does not accomplish what he does in the original story. With the silver chain, no, not this time.
Not this time.
Here, the Striga motif is indeed retold, but with an altogether different ending. Because Geralt's not yet a pure professional. He can't do it because he's not yet who he will become. For now, he messed up and committed a terrible blunder.
The Witcher didn't get a second chance. Before his astonished eyes, the Striga grabbed the chain with both paws. The hiss and smoke from the burning skin didn't seem to bother her. She only screamed horribly. She yanked the chain. Geralt prudently let go of his end, but the last lynx managed to catch on his belt buckle. Knocked out of rhythm, he lost his balance and fell onto the tombstone, knocking it over. The Striga attacked with a wild jump and pinned him to the ground. Her fangs snapped just above his face. Saliva flooded his eyes. He twisted out from under her and hit her furry ear with the silver studs of his glove with all his might. He struck once, twice, and a third time, until he knocked her off of him. He rolled away. The Striga was already on him, already raking his jerkin with her claws and snapping her fangs in his face. He pushed her away with a rather desperate blow of his silver studs, so hard that she fell to the ground. Before she could jump up, he jumped back, making the sign of Ard with his fingers. It didn't work. He tried again, rather clumsily out of fear. It didn't work again. The elixir shouldn't have allowed this to happen, but the battle frenzy suddenly gave way to terror. Panic flowed over him like a waterfall, and it was panic that dictated his further actions. Geralt jumped back, yanked the sword from its scabbard. With a jump and a half-turn, he slashed the attacking Striga in the neck, with a classic mandrito tondo. The half-cut head hung on the Striga's shoulder, but despite this, the monster continued to walk, waving its clawed paws uncoordinatedly. Geralt circled the Striga in a half-turn and slashed once more. The head fell off and rolled among the graves. A geyser of arterial blood spurted high up from the monster's neck. He managed to jump back before it bathed him. He approached, slowly and carefully. He knew that a monster animated by magic could do damage even after losing its head. The Striga lying between the tombstones looked completely dead, and she was, in a growing pool of blood still pumped by the heart. And before the Witcher's eyes, she began to change, gradually, starting from her feet, through her shins, thighs, stomach, breasts, until she became a young girl, very young, and very dead, because she was headless. Geralt cursed rather nastily. This was not the effect that he had expected, and one he could be proud of, it was not at all.
And what's more, this is when he comes to the horrifying realization that he not only feels empathy, but he feels fear. And fear is not something a Witcher should feel. Empathy is an unfortunate and negligible oversight, but fear? In his line of work, fear is something that will certainly get him killed.
What was I supposed to? Geralt took a sip from his goblet, caught his breath with difficulty, and coughed. What was I supposed to tell the Margrave? That it was all my fault? That, instead of wearing out the Striga with dancing until the third crowing of the cockerel, I cut her head off because my legs suddenly went soft, and my throat constricted so much that my eyes went dark. Should I tell him? Geralt raised his head. That something was wrong with me? That I was a defect? A flawed, failed Witcher? That he made a mistake by assigning the task to me instead of some more successful Witcher? One who, even without elixirs, simply cannot experience something like I experienced there? Would the Margrave understand? I doubt it, because I don't understand myself. What's wrong with me? Preston Holt, can you explain this to me? Holt stood up. No, I can't. Let's go to bed. It's late.
Geralt the Witcher, who was created to not feel, to not fear, to not love, but to kill, it turns out that this Witcher, who was deprived of his humanity, is human. And for that reason, he is wrong. He is a defect. He needs fixing. In other words, he's a failure of a Witcher. This character conflict is not only emotionally painful and not only provokes interesting questions, but this false belief that he's a defect and a failure is absolutely consistent to the original character from this series in the 90s. In the original books, especially in the short stories, Geralt constantly battles this innate emotionality of his, which he interprets as inferiority.
I was created to enter filth, which fills other people with disgust and revulsion. I was deprived of the ability to feel, so I wouldn't be able to feel how dreadfully vile is that vileness, so I wouldn't retreat from it, wouldn't run horror-stricken from it. Yes, I was stripped of feelings, but not utterly. Whoever did it made a botch of it, Yen.
Damn, this shit's been haunting him for his whole life. So, not only is Sapkowski drawing from the same well of Arthurian motifs which colored the original Witcher series, he is also echoing the same character conflicts and characterization to develop this past version of our protagonist. And through this, there is one more thing he does which connects this prequel to the original series in a meaningful, resonant fashion. To understand what he does and why he does it, let's again return to Percival. While staying at the Fisher King's castle during the dinner, Percival witnesses a procession of divine objects carried by servants from room to room. In Chrétien de Troyes' account, one of these objects is the Grail, and Percival here makes a big mistake.
He showed you great honor indeed, seating you at his side. Tell me, seated there, did you see the spear that bled without the presence of flesh or veins? Did I see it? Oh yes, by God I did. And did you ask why it was bleeding? I said not a word. In the name of God, believe me, you made a mistake. That was wrong. Did you see the Grail, too? Quite clearly. By whom was it carried? A girl. Well, where did she come from? From a room. And where did she go? Into some other room. Did anyone walk in front of her? Yes. Who? 2 servants, that's all. And what were they holding? Well-lit candle holders. And who came after the Grail? A girl. And what was she holding? A small silver platter. Did you ask any of these people where they were going with these things? Not a word escaped my lips. Oh, Lord, that's even worse.
If he had only asked about the Grail, he could have healed the Fisher King of his wound. But, having been taught not to ask such questions, he kept silent, thus dooming the Fisher King to his fate. And a similar procession happens in the Welsh account too, except rather than the Grail, what Percival witnesses is a severed head. We'll get back to that. One of the elements which Sapkowski elaborated on in this prequel is the pogrom of Kaer Morhen, which was introduced and given history in the first book of the saga, Blood of Elves. Here, it was framed as a past tragedy, occurring about a century ago. The Witcher's Keep was attacked by fanatics, stirred up by the lampoon, monstrum, or description of the Witcher. Geralt is too young to have existed during the pogrom itself. It precedes his birth by some 30-odd years. But, with it being in recent memory of the Witchers, the living history and trauma of it is taught to those of Geralt's generation. But still, it's taught in a filtered way, the way that only time can filter history. As the novel picks up speed, Geralt begins to draw suspicions about his mentor, Preston Holt, who moves in different orbits than his father, Vesemir. He begins to ask questions about the year 1194, when the pogrom took place. And he asks these questions to the priestesses of Melitele, addressing them to Mother Assumpta, the high priestess before Nenneke.
What really happened in Kaer Morhen? In the year 194? You're asking me that? She raised her head. You, who, from early childhood, looked at the bones in the moat, and the names of 7 witchers who died heroically, carved in the wall, who was raised on heroic stories. Those are the stories I'm talking about. Too heroic. They should be, boy. Heroes are supposed to be heroes, and stories are supposed to make them be, and one shouldn't doubt either of them. But what can't you do? That time inexorably blurs everything, including heroism. And stories and legends are there to counteract that, even at the cost of so-called objective truth. Because the truth isn't for everyone. The truth is for those who can bear it.
Assumpta had witnessed the aftermath of the pogrom herself, rushing there as a healer with adepts to save the remaining witchers. And there she found Holt, then called Reindeert, who wasn't in the keep but had run away from it. He fled during the attack. He abandoned his family and left them there to die. But this becomes not his only sin. Rather, it was motivation for the rest to follow. After being exiled from Kaer Morhen by Vesemir, Reindeert, who went back to using his birth name, Preston Holt, began to take care of business. A reminder of our internal conflict here for a second. This whole time, Holt has warned Geralt to not act as a vigilante, but as a witcher, to not kill men, but monsters. So, as it turns out, Holt went and killed some monsters. Geralt is countered by a Caedvenian prefect who informs him of the accusations circling around Holt, and thus which now circle him.
You're a criminal's assistant, the prefect interrupted sharply. Preston Holt, whom you're working for, is a criminal. He deliberately and treacherously murdered 3 people. Kare Nurid, a cripple on crutches, hanged by his own long johns. Otto Maguyes, a distinguished social activist and philanthropist, hacked to death with a meat cleaver. Remco Valba, father of 3 and grandfather of 6, beaten to death with a shoemaker's hammer. These 3 murdered men, Estevan Trio da Cunha explained calmly, led the general levy that attacked Kaer Morhen, your Witcher settlement, in the year 194. That is precisely why, young man, I will not believe that the blame for these crimes lies with some random criminals, because I know who was really to blame, and what their motive was. Well, that's clear, Geralt said slowly. We are finally home. The year 194. You know what, Prefect? If all this is true, then these 3 deserved it. They deserved their fate. I would have gladly killed them myself. I had a motive like hell to pity someone beat me to it. And if I happened to meet this someone, I would congratulate them and thank them, and buy them a beer.
Geralt denies it for some time, but eventually finds unmistakable evidence that Holt murdered these men. As they are training fencing, Holt suffers another bout of chronic pain, which puts an interruption to their lessons. During that time, Geralt reads in the library of Rotsamora, and as he's reading, the Grail, or rather a severed head, falls into his hands, a copy of Monstrum, but not just any copy. A copy dedicated from its author to one of the murdered men, a trophy that Holt took from one of the 3 killed in revenge. Holt, who all this time has advised Geralt about enacting vigilante justice, is proven and confesses to having done the very same. Geralt does not scorn Holt for it, but only finds hypocrisy in his teaching.
Sergeant Margies, Norid, and Falba supposedly led the gang that attacked Kaer Morhen in 94, so I don't feel sorry for them, and I don't think of crying over them. That makes me happy, Holt sneered, because I'd thought you'd want to hold a trizna for them. Recently, Geralt continued calmly, a certain blacksmith told me something quite wise. Let everyone, he said, mind their own. His, the blacksmith's business, is the anvil and the hammer. The Witcher's business is to kill monsters, and punishing for crimes is the business of the mayor and the courts. Words worth remembering. Holt became serious. Remember them the next time you rush with a sword to defend some harassed girl, and hack a man to death. That's something completely different. Not true. It's exactly the same.
Holt confesses to the murders, and also confesses that yet one target still lives on, and is not on his conscience. The author of Monstrum himself. Because the author signed the copy only with a mysterious coat of arms, with 3 martlets, Holt confides that he was unable to identify him for certain, and thus the real instigator of the pogrom was still out there. With this revelation of these murders, Geralt has a weighty decision to make, returning to Holt's offer, made at the Crossroads of Ravens, to continue to apprentice underneath him, or to leave Rotsamora and go out on his own. Geralt, by his will, would still have Holt as his preceptor, but when the time comes for the decision to be made, it turns out that there is no decision to make at all anymore, because Holt does not give him one. He tells Geralt to leave Rotsamora. Upset and lost, Geralt travels on his own for a while, and focuses on his work. We enter, for a brief time, a couple of lighthearted chapters, where he untangles a Romeo and Juliet type of situation, and wins the friendship of the sorceress Vry Nataravan. Owing to the aid he gave her, she grants him her boon, a magic stone which he can summon her from. This will come in handy later, but as more circumstances unfold, Geralt comes across the missing piece of Holt's unfinished puzzle, the bearer of the coat of arms with 3 martlets. The author of Monstrum, the one that wrote that hideous lampoon that stirred the mob that incited the violence upon Kaer Morhen. This mysterious figure summons him to his estate himself, and he is none other than the Dean of the Academy of Magic in Ban Ard, Artemon of Asguth, a sorcerer. To absolutely no one's surprise, Vilgefortz, Daerlund, and now this guy, and Eastred was also a dick. Has there ever just been like a normal chill guy sorcerer? I don't know. Dorgare, maybe? Carduin? I don't know. Anyways, Artemon, in the presence of Geralt, begins to pay him compliment and appeals to his weakness, his humanity.
You're a Witcher, the sorcerer began after a long moment. A mutant, created as a result of a process that seemed to someone as an improvement of nature. But nature cannot be improved, or modified. Any manipulation of what nature has created means pathology, corruption and destruction, depravity. Who, if not you, must I remind of the Bangrud Citadel and the aberration that was created there, the infamous cats. At one extreme we have cats, the result of nature's corruption. At the other, you are the result of something opposite. You, Geralt, are the best example of what I was talking about. In your case, nature is beginning to win in the fight against the pathogen. And you, righteousness and empathy are reviving, which the Witcher mutation was supposed to completely eradicate in you. That is why I sent the invitation. Because I want to make you an offer. To present a request that I could not present to any ordinary Witcher.
He invites Geralt to visit him in Ban Ard, where he would perform tests on him, the results of which studies he promises would be not only money, not only political immunity, but
the creation of medicines, drugs for diseases that are now incurable and afflict humanity. Think of the gratitude of all humanity. The good you do returns in the same way, young Witcher. Returns in the same way.
To save people and to have their gratitude. The depths of what Geralt desires in his hero's soul. This is the temptation that Geralt faces, to lead the hero astray from his quest. But after exchanging these falsities and leaving, Geralt cannot shake his suspicions, so he dismounts, walks back, and eavesdrops. Take a shot for every time that Sapkowski uses eavesdropping to move the plot forward. This is when Geralt overhears Artemon instruct the 3 mercenaries he saw in the courtyard, explain his plans for the assassination of Preston Holt and of the priestesses of Elsborg. Thus, Geralt is faced with evil, and he finds himself standing at a crossroads, to remain neutral or avenge, to be a witcher or a killer. It's fucking Geralt, you know what he's gonna do. Yeah, he just kills this guy with his bare hands. It's giving Season of Storms Sorrel Daggerlund. You know, I'm beginning to think that Geralt should have just let Vilgefortz catch these hands, and we'd have had a lot less trouble in the saga.
Well, to be fair, I guess he did try.
Anyways, this is also work of Percival, because remember that severed head in the Welsh account? It turns out, later in the story, to be the head of his cousin, his family, who was killed by none other than witches, sorceresses. Percival and the rest of the knights rally and avenge the murder of his family by slaying the 9 sorceresses, which it turned out he was destined to do.
And I came with the bloody head in the salver, and with the lance that streamed with blood from the point to the hand, all along the shaft. And the head was thy cousin's, and he was killed by the sorceresses of Gloucestershire, who also lamed thine uncle. And I am thy cousin, and there is a prediction that thou art to avenge these things. Then Peredor and Gwalchmai took counsel, and sent to Arthur and his household, to beseech them to come against the sorceresses, and they began to fight with them. One of the sorceresses set up a cry, and desired the other sorceresses to flee, and told them that this was Peredor, the man who had learnt chivalry with them, and by whom they were destined to be slain. Then Arthur and his household fell upon the sorceresses, and slew the sorceresses of Gloucestershire every one. And thus it is related concerning the Castle of Wonders.
Geralt, like Peredor, kills for his family, the Witchers, to avenge them against the sorceress foes.
Furthermore, the name of Holt's estate, Rotsamora, derives from the elder speech Rots Amore, which means revenge for one's family. Holt named his estate this after performing the revenge for the pogrom of Kaer Morhen. Now Geralt also will set out on his own Rots Amore.
And the account of Peredor ends here. But for Geralt, this vengeance is not without consequence. This launches the rest of the story into action, and into a destructive cycle. For it's not Geralt that gets blamed for the murder of the sorcerer, but Holt, who turns himself in for the murder in lieu of the young Geralt. Death cannot catch up with you, so it must settle for us. Death dogs your footsteps, White Wolf, but others die. Because of you. The 2 convene in Holt's cell before his execution, and here we reach the atonement with the father part of the hero's journey. Geralt rode to prevent the execution, but as it turned out, it cannot be stopped. And in the audience, he hears the haunting vocalization of a mysterious old woman.
The executioner turned the knob. Holt wheezed. The old woman in the escutcheon squawked. The executioner turned the screw once more, and once more. And that was the end. The old woman squawked again. Only now did Geralt realize that it wasn't a squawk, but laughter.
But we'll return to that shortly. The real turn of events comes when Geralt retrieves Holt's belongings from their agent, Voronov, along with a letter, which reveals all.
Geralt, if you are reading this letter, I am no longer among the living. So I must admit my guilt to you, or rather, my sins. I could not do it looking you in the eye. It would be easier with ink. I, my young Witcher, have known for a long time who was the author of Monstrum, whose coat of arms features the martlet birds, and who wrote the dedication on the copy of Sergeant Margulies I killed. I knew it was Artemon of Asguth, and I intended to kill him. But since the progressing illness made my task difficult, if not impossible, I decided to find another executor. Yes, you guessed it right. Our meeting in Newhold did not happen by accident, and it was not without a hidden purpose that I got you out of trouble there. It was not without reason and hidden intention that I made you an offer at the Crossroads of Ravens. It was not without reason that I taught you the ways of killing with your bare hands. And it was not by accident that that dedicated brochure fell into your hands. But in the end, I was overcome with doubts. A blacksmith's business is an anvil and a hammer, remember? A witcher's business is to kill monsters. And punishing for crimes is the business of the mayor and the courts. In the spring, let's be honest, I expelled you from Rotsamora. I remember the look in your eyes. And I could only think of one thing at the time, that I was rescuing you. Saving you from becoming a killer, just like me. But it turned out that you can't cheat destiny. You didn't kill the sorcerer, and you shouldn't be punished for it. I regret it. Goodbye, Preston Holt.
Preston Holt intended for Geralt to kill Artemon. He was operating under this hidden pretense. Only too late did he come to realize his moral error, as placing the burden of this murder on Geralt would taint the young Witcher's life. So he ceased his influence on him, casting him away. It is a tragic, emotionally powerful ending, yes, but what makes it better is that this story is not only confined to this book. And this is why Crossroads of Ravens functions perfectly as a prequel. It develops its own story, full of its own drama and intrigues, and is capable of standing on its own. And yet, the entire thematic development serves to echo the original story. Because Preston Holt expelled Geralt from his mentorship, but Geralt also does the exact same thing to Ciri in Sword of Destiny. Geralt, in the original series, rides away from Ciri, the child destined to him, because he fears inflicting upon her that Witcher's life, that killing and that death. By leaving her, by pushing her away, by giving her up, he tries to rescue her, save her from becoming a killer like him. But as it turns out, you can't cheat destiny. And the parallels between Ciri and Geralt did not end there. For Geralt's humanity, which he struggled with all this time, still threatens to destroy him in more ways than one. Because his humanity, which is that empathy, that fear he feels, that humanity also makes him capable of hate, or, in another word, contempt. And contempt, as we all know, leads to revenge. Geralt, spurred by Holt's demise, does not leave the loose ends alone. He stalks the mercenaries hired by Artemon, and, impulsively, without heeding the warning of the Ravens, attacks them. But in his hatred, he blunders. He walks directly into a trap. Literally. He literally walks right into a wolf trap. I'm serious, that's what actually happens. And this is where it all begins. The three mercenaries, Mayor Texel, Sibor Ponti, and Beauregard Frick, wound Geralt horribly, beat him senseless, and bring them to their master, the elderly Marquise Servia Harada Grafiacane, the woman who had been present at Holt's execution, laughing. A woman who, in the year of 1194, was also instigator of the pogrom of Kaer Morhen. The backstory. When she was only an unmarried lady, the not-yet Marquise Servia had an affair with the sorcerer Artemon. Servia married the old Marquise, but continued to see Artemon after the marriage. And, although sorcerers are infertile, this affair eventually begot a child, a son who was born after the death of the Marquise, thus inheriting the title of Count. This Count grew up without any restraint, and frequently abused his title to terrorize and start fights. Eventually, he crossed the wrong man, and was killed in cold blood. This killing threw Artemon and the widowed Marquise into a rage to find the murderer. And although they never did, someone spread a rumor that the one who killed their son had been a witcher. Their revenge for their son was the witch hunt, the pogrom of Kaer Morhen. The witcher's revenge for the pogrom was the killing of Artemon, which Holt planned and Geralt carried out. And the Marquise's revenge for Artemon's death was Holt's and more, the abuse and torture of Geralt, and the destruction of the priestesses of Melitle, the steadfast allies of the Witchers. After Geralt is captured and wounded, the three mercenaries bring him to the Temple of Elsborg, feigning a rescue of the Witcher. They plead for the priestesses to open the gate to save Geralt's life, to open the gate so that they can enter and slay them. Then, at the last moment, with his last bit of consciousness, Geralt uses the boon that he was granted earlier, the teleportation stone connecting him to the sorceress Vry Netravan. Vry appears and gives the mercenaries a hiding with the spell, and they flee and escape. Geralt's body is forfeited, and Geralt is barely rescued from without. This begins the long and arduous process of healing from his wounds, both symbolically and literally.
He woke up in darkness and motionless, with a throat painfully dry and swollen, and he woke up in pain. The pain pierced him like a dart, in tearing, pulsating spasms, radiating from his leg to his spine, to his skull, to his eyes. Sometimes he was conscious. Sometimes he wasn't, but then he dreamed he was. Sometimes it seemed to him that he had died. Then he suddenly rose from the dead and thought that he would die soon. Or if not soon, then tomorrow. Then the pain would return, and he wished for it to be that way, for the pain to stop, even by death, for tomorrow already. And then tomorrow would come, and everything would start over again. From that September, as well as from the weeks that followed, there were certain things that he didn't want to remember. He wanted to push them out of his mind. The pain, the humiliation of being immobilized in splints and dressings, making him unable to perform the simplest of tasks on his own. Starting with the most ordinary, like feeding him with a spoon and watering him through a tube, to the less ordinary and even more humiliating. When Nenika, or one of the priestesses, took him by the penis to properly direct the organ into a glass vessel with the neck. He didn't want to remember waking up with lips dry as cardboard, a tongue like a pine dowel, and saliva like hardening carpenter's glue. He didn't want to remember the agony of being turned from supine to prone to treat bed sores. Later, he often went outside, not only for the purpose of rehabilitation exercises. He didn't want to, and couldn't, look at the bed in which he had spent 13 weeks, the nastiest weeks of his life, without disgust.
Geralt, at the hands of the mercenaries, suffers great pain and humiliation. Pain and humiliation. This is what those mercenaries did to him, and him personally. Revenge for the Witchers of Kaer Morhen, Geralt has taken that by Artemon. Revenge for Preston Holt, Geralt will also take by murdering the widowed Marquis. But Geralt, our young Geralt, endures the worst suffering when he was left alone and without his mentor. After the killing of his family, after the killing of one close to him, this revenge on the mercenaries will be his own personal revenge. And this same top boss plays out with Ciri decades later. This is why Geralt, in Time of Contempt, cries out that Ciri cannot be left alone, for if she's left alone, the same thing will happen to her as which happened to him, suffering and contempt. In Tower of the Swallow, Ciri's new family, the Rats, and one close to her, her Missile, are slain by the bounty hunter Leo Bonhart. Ciri, like Geralt, suffers and is humiliated greatly, personally, at the hands of Bonhart. He beats her, makes her strip to nothing, drags her around on a chain like a dog. He makes her fight in his cousin's arena, killing for sport and entertainment. I have to make a note of perhaps a gender bias here, that both of Ciri and Geralt's humiliations have to do with their bodies, but in opposite ways. For Ciri, the humiliation is public. She's a spectacle in an arena, forced to kill like an animal. Those who invoke the humiliation is the crowd, thirsty for blood. For Geralt, the humiliation is private. He's a convalescent in a sickbed, unable to kill and barely able to perform basic bodily functions. Those who invoke the humiliation are the very nurses which tend to him. Anyhow, once Ciri escapes, she, like Geralt, premeditates her revenge. And her revenge, like Geralt's, threatens to consume her. We are once again faced with the central question, in this prequel as we are in the original series. How can one confront evil? What is the purpose of revenge?
You're speaking in anger. I think you're planning your revenge in anger, and I strongly urge you to calm down. I am calm. And revenge? Answer me. Why not? Why should I eschew revenge? In the name of what? Where is the punishment for evil? Who should attest it, adjudge it, and inflict it? You naive old man. And so it's an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, blood for blood, and for that blood more blood? A sea of blood? Do you want to drown the world in blood? Oh, naive, damaged girl. Is that how you mean to fight evil, little witcher? Yes, just like that. That's how you fight evil. Pay it back. Pay it back twofold, threefold. An eye for an eye? No, both eyes for an eye. A tooth for a tooth? No, all its teeth for a tooth. Pay evil back. Make it howl with pain, so its eyeballs burst from its howling. I'm a witcher. When they were teaching me, I swore I would act against evil. Always, and without thinking. Because when you start thinking, killing stops making sense. Revenge stops making sense. And you can't let that happen?
Ciri was consumed by hatred, contempt, at the lowest part of her arc, for three men in particular: the sorcerer Rience, the bounty hunter Leo Bonhart, and the Nilfgaardian prefect Stefan Skellen. Each of these men hurt her, Skellen in particular through the Orion which marred her cheek, scarring her for life. But as Ciri takes her revenge, she matures. Hers is revenge and not annihilation, after all. Ciri slays Rience on the ice, 8 fingers. Later, she kills Bonhart. And this is why, by the way, despite fan protests upon reading Lady of the Lake, Geralt could not face up against and kill Bonhart. Bonhart's fate was intertwined with Ciri's, not Geralt's. As they were opposed in the narrative, only she could defeat him. Ciri kills Rience. She kills Bonhart. But she does not kill Skellen. She grants him mercy.
I knew you would succeed, O courageous maiden. My brave Swallow. Did you emerge unharmed? I defeated them. On the ice. I had a surprise for them. Your daughter's skates. I meant psychological harm. I held back from vengeance. I didn't kill them all. I didn't kill Tawny Owl, even though he hurt and disfigured me. I controlled myself. I knew you'd prevail, Zirial.
And for Geralt, it is also similar. Revenge is again presented as a balancing act. But that doesn't mean he gives up on it entirely. As he leaves Ellsborg to ride to Arg Carag, Nanneke grants him wisdom before he departs.
Will you allow me a word before we leave? Of course. He jumped into the saddle. Of course, Nanneke. Revenge, she said, opening the gate, is a joy only for shallow and primitive minds. I know. Revenge will put you outside the law. I know. So go and... yeah? And kill those motherfuckers.
After slaying the monstrous Marquise, he leaves Caedven pursuing his personal revenge against the 3 mercenaries, Sibor Ponti, Beauregard Frick, and Meritexel. Geralt tracks down the first 2, and kills. But for Meritexel, who slashed him with a knife across the forehead, granting him an ugly scar for which he wears such a headband, Geralt indeed pursues her to kill and to avenge himself. But, like Ciri, he lets it go. After a long time on her trail, Geralt finds the mercenary Meritexel. He follows her to the ocean, about to smuggle herself onto a boat, which, if she boards it, will take her to somewhere far away, somewhere where it will be impossible to trace her. If she manages to depart now, he will be unable to find her ever again. Geralt's revenge must happen now or never. He spies her, rides after her, and she makes a mistake in fear. She gets caught in the stirrup of her horse, lying on the ground. It runs off without her. Geralt approaches slowly. She won't escape him now. He's going to kill her. He will have his revenge. But, as he does so, something else comes into view. Nearby, children are playing, and a great insectoid monster coils in the grass, stalking them. A Yigurn, a giant centipede. If Geralt pursues Meritexel, he'll have his revenge, but he'll leave these children to die. If he kills the centipede, he'll save the children, but will forfeit his revenge forever, even to the one which wounded him the worst. Geralt stands at a crossroads yet again. He must make a decision. Another choice. But we already know what he will do, because he is Geralt, who, at this moment, becomes Geralt of Rivia. Our Geralt of Rivia. The hero and the witcher. The one we know. The one we've known for 38 years.
The raven cawed. Meritexel jumped up from the ground, dashed towards her horse, which was standing calmly on the road, a quarter of a furlong away. She jumped onto the saddle, broke into a gallop, urging the horse on with a shout. She quickly disappeared around a bend in the road. Geralt didn't look in her direction. Suddenly, she stopped being of interest to him. Something else was important. Another choice. He jumped down from the saddle. With a brisk step, he moved diagonally across the slope, towards the creepy myriapod, so as to cut off its path, to separate it from the children. He reached over his shoulder, bared his blade. Dobhen hern am glandale, morch am fein einsin. My gleam penetrates the darkness. My brightness disperses the gloom. The Witcher walked along the slope. The wind was blowing from the sea. Grasshoppers were spraying from underneath his feet.
Yes, Geralt saves the children. But not just from any monster. Note here that he specifically saves these children from a giant centipede, a scolopendromorph, a Yigurn with a segmented body, yellow legs, and a flat dark brown head coiling in the grass. the very same kind of monster described in an utterly similar fashion that he saves Ciri from in Sword of Destiny, in their very first meeting. Geralt, at the end of Crossroads of Ravens, changes, not only to become the man he will be, not only into the hero he will be, but into the father that he will be. Meritxell, his revenge, stops being of interest to him. Something else is important to him now. Something more will become important to him. Geralt lets go of his revenge, thus his youth, and that youth and that revenge will soon be Ciri's. The daughter he does not know yet, the child that he could never have expected, his surprise. For now, he settles, having contended with his false belief. The false belief that's been told to him from the beginning of the novel, that he is wrong for his feelings, that he's a defect, that the humanity was supposed to be taken out of him by the mutations. They failed. And indeed, Geralt pursued his revenge because of his humanity. His humanity, after all, begets him his capacity for hatred. It's his greatest weakness, his imperfection. But he must accept this imperfection, as Holt told him in Rotsamora.
In any case, you, Geralt, are one of the last to set off on the trail from Kaer Morhen. One of the last. It's a shame it wasn't, as it turns out, very successful. Is it because of those stale elixirs? Maybe. Maybe not only that. When nature encounters mutation, it fights it. You have no choice, young Witcher. You have to accept your own imperfection.
And it is indeed imperfection in this sense, because Witchers were supposed to be perfection.
A superhuman, an improved version of the human species. The first step in the evolution of the entire species to a higher level, in every regard.
But this imperfection, this humanity causing his vengeance, is also exactly what brings him out of it. Because it is not only his greatest weakness, but his greatest strength. It is Geralt's humanity which allows him to let go of his revenge. Because his humanity is not only his capacity for hate and fear, it's his capacity for love, for morality, his innate desire to do the right thing. In other words, his heroism. Despite the false belief that being a hero is incompatible with being a Witcher, that a hero gets involved and sticks his neck out to save people, meanwhile a Witcher keeps his nose out of it and works only for money, in the end, we learn that that's wrong. At least, for our Witcher, Geralt. Because for Geralt, to pursue being a hero is to pursue the same thing as being a Witcher. It is to defend the innocent, to save. And this is not imperfection, but perfection. Because this is precisely what the renegade sorcerer, the Prometheus, who stole the formulas and spells to create the Witchers, intended and wished to create. A savior of humanity.
A Witcher was supposedly a Superman, yes, but not for power, not for some royal bodyguard, but for the common good, for everyone. And everyone, I remind you, suffered greatly because of monsters, which sometimes made existence almost impossible. The improved being was supposed to protect and save people from monsters. It was supposed to be a salvation, and a cure for every evil.
Geralt is a Witcher. His reason for existence, a Witcher's principium. For Geralt is no longer Percival, but King Arthur, who will return from the beyond to save, to always appear exactly where he's needed, answering the call for help, rushing to where he is summoned. May he appear with sword in hand. With that, Crossroads of Raven's story concludes, an echo of the original cycle, but not at all a hollow one. This is why the novel succeeds in everything a prequel should succeed in. It makes its own interesting story, separate from the events of the original media. It echoes that of the original media, not only by using familiar characters, but by developing parallel themes and thematic statements. And it leaves us with a final image that is utterly congruent with what was already established all those years ago. Thank you very much for watching. Leave a comment to let me know what you thought about the book, and I'll see you next time on Ani Vitre.